Okay, so explaining variation. We start with variation, or differences, as in they vary and are not all the same. That's where vary and variation comes from. So we start with those variations in general. And part of our job as statisticians will be to explain the variation that we see. In other words, why do we see variation in the variable that we're examining? In this case, we tried to explain some of the variation we see in finger lengths for this class dataset by splitting the data up into those different fingers. This helps to partly explain why some of the finger lengths we saw are short, their thumbs and pinkies, and some are long, their pointers, rings, and middles. The thing is, we'll never be able to explain all of the variation we see because there are just too many different factors that affect things like finger length or self-esteem, right? That affect all sorts of things. Um, and so that means that we'll always have some unexplained variation. And this unexplained variation is sometimes referred to as random variation. Now, the random variation will include a few different kinds of variation, such as the types that are listed in your classwork. So, not yet explained variation. This is the unexplained variation due to variables that we have not yet included in our statistical model or analysis. We could include some of this information to explain more variation in the future if we knew more about the people in the sample, such as their gender, their height, their childhood nutrition, and so on, other things that might affect their finger length. Now, measurement error is variation that is due to errors in the measuring process. So it's due to errors in actually measuring the fingers. So, for example, some people may have measured their fingers incorrectly, or they may have been a little off. Some people may have included, um, fingernails in one and not in the other. So, there are lots of different ways that we can experience measurement error, which is the actual physical measurement. And finally, sampling variation. Remember that term sampling, meaning like taking multiple samples is what sampling means. So sampling variation is variation due to the fact that this is just one sample. For example, one class. And if we're to sample another group, like another class, we would be almost guaranteed to get slightly different responses. It would be really weird if we got the exact same finger measurements for every student between two completely different samples, right? So we expect to see differences between those groups simply because each sample will vary or be a little different from every other sample. We expect to see differences there. So in other words, the data and variation we see in a data set depends on who is actually in that particular data set. And so sampling variation is just expecting to see this natural variation between different samples.